We will now move on to our second speaker, who is Elena Gittleman. And Elena is a PhD candidate in the history of art at Bryn Mawr College. She received her BA from Washington University in St. Louis and an MA from Southern Methodist. She's held positions at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Met Cloisters. She's been a square supervisor at the Hukak Excavation Project in Northern Israel. She's won research grants from the International Center of Medieval Art and the Istanbul Research Institute, and she has presented her research at both national and international conferences. Her dissertation explores the legacy of ancient Greco-Roman theater and medieval Byzantine visual culture, and the title of her paper today is Prostitute or Protector of the People: The Reception of Empress Theodora and Byzantium in Ricardo Freda's Teodora Imperatrice di Bisanzio. And we welcome Elena Gittleman.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. All right. First of all, I would really like to thank the organizers of this conference. I'm so excited to be part of it, and I've had a really great time learning from all of you over the past day and a half. Unlike classical antiquity, Byzantium is largely absent from contemporary culture. It is not evoked in political discourse. Its architecture does not form the basis for capital cities around the globe, and it is rarely the setting for films, television shows, novels, or video games. Indeed, in Western tradition, the reception of Byzantium has been reduced to an Orientalist amalgam of golden decadence, murderous, conniving rulers, and convoluted systems of both government and religion. It is represented as an empire in constant and continuous decline. My paper today explores one little-known Italian film which stands apart from this pejorative Western reception of Byzantium. Ricardo Freda's 1954 film, Teodora Imperatrice di Bisanzio, centers around Theodora, the famous 6th century Byzantine empress and consort to Emperor Justinian. The plot follows the story of the imperial couple, how they met, how they ruled. And it is filled with action, drama, court intrigue, and deception. At first glance, and certainly from the appearance of the theatrical release poster, it appears as if Freda fell into the standard Orientalist depiction of Byzantium. However, as my paper will show, Freda's film stands apart from other early to mid-20th century artistic or popular depictions of Byzantium and Theodora, which were steeped in Orientalism and sexism. Instead of depicting Theodora as an immoral, promiscuous woman at the mercy of her own sexual desires, Freda's empress is a modern woman who embraces her sexuality and uses it to her advantage to become a politically and socially progressive ruler. In this paper, I argue that Freda subverts the traditional pejorative reception of the Byzantine Empire, as well as the sword and sandal genre itself, by putting forth this purposeful recharacterization of Empress Theodora as an active ally and protector of the poor, and of Byzantium as an empire striving for equality. The first decade of Italian cinema in the post-war period was dominated by the emergence of Italian neorealism. Between 1945 and 1955, Italian neorealists focused their films on serious, contemporary social, political, and economic problems, calling attention to injustice and the need for social reform. Their films reflect an emphasis on social realism, in which historical accuracy and realist treatment of the subjects was prioritized, in order to make films that, quote, contained a message of fundamental human solidarity fostered by anti-fascist resistance. Despite the international popularity of the neorealists and their ubiquity in film history, these films were in fact quite risky to make. The immediate post-war years in Italy were marked by political turmoil. The continuing conflict between the Communist Party and the Christian Democrats often resulted in strikes and political violence, leading to an unsuccessful assassination attempt on the head of the Communist Party in 1948. As a result of this political turmoil, producing films with strongly socially progressive statements or clear liberal ideological positions became a risky investment for filmmakers because they could easily be censored or sequestered by the government. This political pressure was compounded by the economic pressure of making a box office hit. the public continued to prefer traditional melodramas, comedies, and historical sword and sandal epics, that is, historical epics set in the classical period. Sword and sandal films rejected any concern with realism or historical reconstruction of the past, used stage sets and professional actors, and were all about the spectacle. That is, the complete opposite of the concerns of the neo-realists. Theodora is traditionally considered Freda's second sword and sandal epic. However, I contend that the film is in fact a hybrid of that genre and neo-realism. Aesthetically, it fits all the marks of a sword and sandal epic, but thematically, it is much more closely aligned with the concerns of the neo-realists. While the film primarily utilizes stage sets and professional actors and lacks a lot of historical accuracy, the characterization of Empress Theodora as a revolutionary in the face of social and political injustice is decidedly neo-realist. The focus of the film is not the epic moments of the chariot race nor the battle, even though these are major plot points, but on the positive progressive changes brought about by Theodora and Emperor Justinian, despite numerous attempts by the greedy and power-hungry patricians to stop them. Interestingly, the undercurrent of neo-realism in a film that looked like a sword and sandal epic severely disappointed film critics. One reviewer lamented, quote, "the innumerable lengthy and monotonous dialogue scenes," end quote, which were the opposite of the expected entertainment and spectacle of the genre. However, by cloaking a progressive social and political message within the more innocuous sword and sandal genre, Freda was able to safely produce pro-proletarian commentary and mold a new Byzantium that would deeply resonate with contemporary Italian audiences. One of the most obvious ways Freda reshaped Byzantium was in his characterization of Empress Theodora. Before World War II, Theodora's image as overtly sexual and detrimental to the empire was largely constructed through Procopius's Anecdota and Victorien Sardou's 1884 play Theodora. The Anecdota, which is basically a medieval tell-all written by the 6th century court historian Procopius after the deaths of Justinian and Theodora, portrays the empress as a literal prostitute who purposefully destroyed the empire together with her equally despicable husband. The Anecdota has been widely read and translated since its first publication in 1623 and influenced many popular depictions of Theodora, including Sardou's play. This play focuses on the empress as overtly sexual and detrimental to the empire. It was also extremely popular and resulted in Byzantium and Theodora enjoying a remarkable popularity in the last 15 years of the 19th century, a popularity which continued, especially in Italy, well into the 20th century. After the Second World War, Theodora's image was reevaluated and connected to the contemporary political climate. This is when Theodora became an empress from the people and for the people, with reception focused widely on her low social origin, although there is no historical evidence that her lowly birth influenced any of her actions as empress. Freda takes up this version of Theodora, but importantly does not disregard her sexuality nor the Orientalist tropes associated with Byzantium. Instead, Theodora paints a picture of an empire full of contradictions and tensions. It is both Eastern and Western, sexual and chaste, classical and Orientalist, in order to create a Theodora who encapsulates all of these contradictions to become a steadfast and active ally to and protector of the poor. The film opens up in the only non-stage set with the consecration of the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, in the year 547. San Vitale is the best known and best preserved Byzantine church in Italy, and is famous for the mosaic panel portraits of Emperor Justinian and Empress Theodora. However, neither Justinian nor Theodora actually ever set foot in Ravenna and had nothing to do with the construction or consecration of this famous church. Despite the lack of historical reality, placing the emperor within the church establishes a connection between Italy and Byzantium from the very beginning. This is a distinct departure from the way Western Europe traditionally viewed Byzantium. Most 19th and early 20th century French and Italian writers emphasized the supposed decadence, grandeur, and intrigue of the Byzantine court, successfully otherizing and orientalizing Byzantium. However, Freda does the exact opposite. The prominence of San Vitale in the film, not to mention actually filming on location, brings Byzantium back west, reconnecting it with its Italian roots. As an aged emperor, Justinian begins reminiscing about the past and the beginning of his relationship with his wife. The audience is transported back to Constantinople, where the main narrative begins. Prominent in this first establishing scene of Constantinople is classical architecture and classical statues. However, Justinian's voiceover describes Byzantium as garish, dazzling, mysterious. Words often used pejoratively to describe Byzantium and are here very much at odds with the classicizing nature of the set design. The frictions of Freda's Byzantium continue to grow as Justinian, disguised as a regular patrician in a costume of blue and white, walks in the marketplace, speaking with the poor in an attempt to discover their needs, while Andres, the head of Justinian's guard and the charioteer for the blues, who are the noble class, wanders through the same crowd, mocking the destitute and poor. Quickly, we meet Theodora, clad in a bright red headscarf, as she attempts to steal the gold medallion hanging from Justinian's neck. The majority of the costumes throughout the film are blue and green, largely corresponding to the historical rallying colors of the Byzantine circus factions, and here simplified to correspond to the wealthy ruling class, the blues, and the poor working class, the greens. Freda places Theodora in red costumes twice during the film in pivotal moments not only for herself, but also for all of Byzantium. The color emphasizes her strength and fiery disposition, as well as working as an allusion to the communist flag. It is additionally important to note that red was considered an imperial color along with purple. Freda is clearly aware of this historical fact, as later in the film, Theodora requests red shoes instead of the gold she was given. John the Cappadocian states that only those of imperial rank can wear the color red. This short exchange reveals the importance of clothing in Byzantium as identifying one's place in society, while also laying bare the fact that Freda utilized costuming in a similar identifying way throughout the film. The next major scene is set within a tavern near the stables. Theodora, having been caught by Justinian trying to steal his medallion, ran off with the disguised emperor at her heels. Moments later, she emerges in an orientalizing belly dancer's costume and begins dancing to the beat of drums played by dark-skinned Black men with bright blue wigs. The belly dance scene is a clear reference to the Anecdota, in which Procopius describes the empress acting in a perverse version of Leda and the Swan. And often even in the theater, before the eyes of the whole people, she stripped off her clothing and moved about naked through their midst, having only a girdle about her private parts and her groin. Clothed in this manner, she sprawled out and laid on her back on the ground, and some slaves whose duty this was, sprinkled grains of barley over her private parts, and geese, which happened to be provided for this very purpose, picked them off with their beaks one by one and ate them. And when she got up, she not only did not blush, but even acted as if she took pride in this strange performance. The film's rather sanitized version of Theodora's performances and her later vehement pronouncements that she was not a courtesan challenges one of the prevailing characterizations of Empress Theodora as an actress prostitute who literally slept her way into the imperial crown to the detriment of the emperor and all of Byzantium. Now, Justinian, immediately smitten and intrigued by the dancing woman who attempted to rob him, follows her up to a lofted space, and the pair lie down on his outer cloak and began to speak. Theodora is at first flirty and coy, but as soon as Justinian tries to get physical with her, she shuts him down completely and begins speaking out against the nobles, and especially about John the Cappadocian, the Praetorian prefect who barred Theodora from taking a position as animal keeper because she is not a blue. She states that she wants to get revenge on the blues for, quote, trying to suppress us. During this scene, there are several times when Gianna Maria Canale looks directly into the camera, implicating the audience in her speech and her righteous indignation. Although Theodora does not recognize the man she is flirting with as the emperor, she purposefully used her sexuality to gain an attentive audience with a man of rank and power. Justinian, in an attempt to win her affection, gives Theodora his medallion and tries to kiss her. She again refuses and runs off with the medallion, laughing. This entire sequence shows Theodora using her sexuality to her advantage. At this point in her life, she has no position or power except that of her own making. She uses her body to put herself into situations where she can speak her mind and speak out against injustices. However, angry from his rejection, Justinian flexed his very real imperial power and sent his guards out to arrest Theodora for stealing the medallion. Theodora is taken into court where Justinian presides. Upon entering, both parties recognize the other, further incensing the emperor. The court finds her guilty, and after Justinian angrily accuses her of being a courtesan, he demands the highest punishment for her crime, 1 day and night in jail, and then the loss of her right hand. Now, this scene takes place in a decidedly Roman architectural space. It is a traditional basilica, and the emperor is seated on a raised platform on an enlarged version of the famous 6th century throne of Archbishop Maximian of Ravenna. The costumes of all of the noblemen present in this scene read as Roman. They are what an audience would expect a classical Roman emperor to wear. Theodora, on the other hand, wears a very revealing green dress over which she throws a blue cloak, foreshadowing her future as part of the noble class, but keeping her proletarian background closest to her body. Throughout the film, the orientalizing or non-classicizing imagery are associated with the lower classes. Take, for example, the character of Archal. He is Theodora's would-be lover and the charioteer for the Greens. He is constantly depicted wearing a costume resembling that of a man's Speedo that really has no basis in historical reality, but definitively reads as other. This is particularly pronounced when he pleads to Justinian after Theodora's arrest to release her. The emperor stands tall and looks every piece a Roman emperor, while Archal is darker, poorer, other. Meanwhile, Theodora seduces her jailer, bragging that these shapely legs of mine are also useful for running, and escapes back to Archal. His house is another example of the ways in which Freda associated the lower classes with the East. There is nothing about the house that looks Roman. In fact, a zebra skin hangs prominently in the middle of the set. During this scene, Theodora drugs Archal so that she could take his place in the big chariot race against Justinian. The racing scene in the Hippodrome is long and impressive. There are many lingering shots on the classical statuary that decorated the stadium, again aligning the upper classes with the classical. Interesting is the complete fabrication of the monuments on the spina, the central raised axis of the Hippodrome. While many of the original statues were lost or stolen, Freda chose not to include known works still in situ in the Hippodrome in Istanbul. Two of the most famous monuments of the Hippodrome are the obelisk of Theodosius and the serpent column, which are conspicuously absent from Freda's stage set. Perhaps including reproductions of these monuments would have read as too Eastern, and so Freda instead manufactured his own decidedly classicizing and Western set of statues. Theodora eventually wins the race to be rewarded with a dinner at the imperial palace and a commutation of her sentence. For the first time, Theodora dons the garb of a noblewoman, a striking contrast to how the audience is accustomed to seeing her. As Eastern slave dancers/acrobats perform in the middle of the room, Theodora sits uneasily with Justinian, judging the opulence of the fat patricians, gorging themselves on fine food and drink. Theodora and Justinian eventually go out into the large courtyard, which was designed to mimic the famous 1st century Roman frescoes depicting a garden in the villa of Livia at Prima Porta, one of the homes of Emperor Augustus and his wife, Livia. Once again, Justinian attempts to seduce Theodora, but she refuses to sleep with him unless they are married. In response to this statement, Justinian bursts out laughing, and Theodora angrily exits the scene, leaving the audience unsure of what the future for the couple holds. Once again, Theodora embraces her sexuality while at the same time retaining control over it and over her body. She refuses to let men use her as a sexual object, and instead wields her sexuality to her advantage. After the dinner, the narrative jumps 5 years into the future when Theodora is empress. The imperial couple stand next to one another in front of the throne in matching imperial vestments. These costumes are quite accurate Byzantine imperial garb, except for one striking detail. Instead of imperial purple, the emperor and empress wear green, the color of the populace. The plot continues with a revolt against the emperor by the Blues, who are unhappy with the empress's progressive tendencies, which Justinian codifies into law. Justinian, on his part, is too trusting of his lying advisors, turns against Theodora, who remains steadfast in her loyalty to both her humble beginnings and her imperial husband. So she runs away from the palace, dons a red dress, and leads the Greens in a battle against the Blues in hopes of saving her husband and her throne. Eventually, the truth of the attempted coup is revealed, the imperial couple is reunited, and live happily ever after, with Justinian gaining his, quote, greatest victory in the love and respect of his people. The plot of Theodora is overt in its messaging. The best political leaders are those who strive for equality and work to elevate the masses. Freda's characterization of Byzantium and the empress, however, are more subtle. Freda did not completely disregard the contemporary popular construction of the empress or of Byzantium. Instead, he embraced both Theodora's sexuality and Byzantium's otherness. Instead of Theodora's sexuality leading to the empire's decline, it in fact saved it and made it a better place. Juxtaposing the classicizing with the orientalizing emphasized inequities between the classes, but casting the wealthy blues as the bad guys subverted traditional negative Orientalist discourse. Freda's hybrid neo-realist sword and sandal epic constructs an image of Byzantium that responded to the social and political climate of mid-1950s Italy by subverting the traditional pejorative reception of Byzantium, which was known for its corrupt rulers. Freda created a world in which even the worst of governments could turn into governments for the people, a strongly hopeful message during a time of intense political uncertainty. Thank you.